Okay. Good morning, everybody. I will do my presentation in English, but most of the slides will be in Bahasa, and Ghazali, my colleague, will do the slide deck. So maybe next. Yeah. FAO ECTAD has been working in Indonesia since 2006. ECTAD stands for Emergency Center for Transboundary Animal Diseases. It started working in Indonesia, mainly focusing on HPAI of mendukung. And over the years, it has moved away from only focusing on HPAI, highly pathogenic avian influenza, to include more diseases as well, more also focusing on strengthening the capacity of the veterinary service, but also the poultry industry. In 2015, emerged infectious diseases, zoonoses, and also multi-sectoral coordination, as we already have seen from One Health, from the presentation from Ibu Nunung. It's focusing on AMR, transboundary animal diseases, emerging infectious diseases, and working either as FAO, but also together with other UN partners like WHO, OIE, and at the moment UNEP in the tripartite as well. Okay, next. This is more or less the content of my presentation. So I will say a few things about zoonoses, One Health, AMR. Environment is very important and has been mentioned already by my previous speakers several times. How to avoid a next pandemic, challenges of One Health, and some recommendations. Next. So I think all of you do know zoonotic diseases, and we realize that human health is closely connected to the health of animals, plants, and environment. But we also have to realize that there are certain diseases, zoonotic diseases, which can spread from animals to humans, but in principle also the other way around. So endemic and emerging zoonotic diseases are spread between animals and people. Next. If we look at One Health, One Health is an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. It recognizes that the health of animals, humans, and domestic and wild animals, plants, and the wider environment are closely linked. The latest statement is from the One Health high-level expert panel, is that the approach mobilizes multiple sectors, disciplines, and communities at varying levels of society to work together to foster well-being and tackle threats to health and ecosystems, while addressing the collective need for clean water, energy and air, nutritious food, and taking action on climate change and contributing to sustainable development. So it's very broad, trying to address all the problems which we are facing in the future health in an intersectoral way. Next. This again shows it once more again, a little bit more simple. On the left-hand side, you see that One Health is focusing on food safety, emerging infectious diseases, neglected zoonoses, antimicrobial resistance, all in a One Health system, meaning working together. On the right-hand side, you can see number 6, the environmental health, and I mentioned it already in my previous slide, is definitely taken on board as well and is becoming more and more important. Next. This is more or less the overview from what FAO ECTAD is doing in the region. There are 5 different areas. It's focusing on improved livestock production, animal production and health in the Asia and Pacific region, antimicrobial resistance, which I will address a little bit further, disease prevention and control, and not only zoonoses or emerging infectious diseases, but also transboundary animal diseases like African swine fever, and more recently, of course, lumpy skin disease are examples of that. The last point, number 5, where actually the One Health is expanding at the moment, is that it not only looks at animal and the public health stakeholders, but it's including the forestry, wildlife, natural resource management, and environmental sectors. And veterinarians will have to play a role on number 5 as well. Next. If you look at the importance of wildlife and what has happened over the last years with wildlife, we have to realize that since 1970, the Earth has lost more than its wildlife. From 1970 to 2012, there have been large declines in terrestrial water and marine species. And we can see that from the terrestrial species, there has been a reduction of 39%, amphibians even 76%, and the marine species almost 40%. In Asia and the Pacific, between 1970 and 2016, vertebrate populations declined by 45%, which can be seen in the graph on the right-hand side. And I think Indonesia is not different in that. Next. If we think about emerging infectious diseases, just analyzing many emerging infectious diseases events over the last 70 years, we can see that 60% are actually coming from animals, and out of these 70%, they are coming from wild animals or wildlife. It's mainly wildlife. If we talk about wildlife, it's in general, but obviously bats, rodentia, like mice and rats, but also the non-human primates are the main sources of these emerging infectious diseases. We also have to realize that emerging infectious diseases are very much driven by certain drivers, social, economic drivers, environmental drivers, ecological drivers, like, for instance, the change of livestock keeping systems, but also deforestation. We also have to realize that actually many of the emerging infectious diseases and outbreaks are actually underreported. On the left-hand side, you can see that there are certain hotspots in the world. It's difficult to see on these 2 maps, but obviously Indonesia, which is high biodiversity, is one of the hotspots in the world for emerging infectious diseases, but also of other diseases like avian influenza and other influenza types could easily emerge and become pandemic from Indonesia. Next. This gives an overview of the emerging infectious diseases over the last many years. Emergence of zoonotic diseases is not a new phenomenon. We have to realize that there's HIV, avian and swine influenza, Ebola, SARS, Rift Valley fever. On average, 1 new emerging or re-emerging infectious disease is seen in humans and animals every 8 months. We also have to realize that a pandemic like COVID-19 has been already repeatedly predicted over the last 25 years, and now we are living through it. We have to realize that emergence events are complex. They often involve a viral spillover in the beginning from wildlife to livestock. A One Health approach across ministries and disciplines is needed to mitigate that threat. And many of the tools needed for the early detection or response and management are already available. They do already exist, but they are not yet used in an optimal way. Next. I can't see the, let me just, okay, this slide shows you actually just over the last 20 years what I mentioned already. We have seen SARS, the first SARS from Hong Kong, which spread in a very short time over the world. Rift Valley fever outbreaks in East Africa, but also spreading out of East Africa. The swine influenza of 2009. A lot of people in the world got infected, more than 50% just in 2 years. So it could spread very easily. I think that's like COVID and influenza are viruses, diseases, which can easily cause a pandemic. We have been seeing Ebola virus in West Africa, later in Southern Africa as well, Nipah virus outbreaks, and then of course what we are enduring at the moment is of course SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. We also have to realize that if we talk about reservoirs, but also virus families, is that certain virus families are more easily causing a pandemic. The coronaviruses like SARS, MERS, and COVID-19, influenza viruses. Then we have the filoviruses like Ebola, the flaviviruses, including Zika virus, and the Nipah viruses, including Hendra virus and Nipah virus. And we have to realize that Nipah virus, for instance, is present in Indonesia as well. Next. If we think of the impact of zoonotic diseases, they are complicated and multi-focus. There are economic factors. It's affecting the human health, disability adjusted life years, which means that people get sick, people die early. It affects the livelihoods of people. These zoonotic diseases are frequently underreported, and when they spread across sectors, the burden is difficult to measure. We can easily measure the economic impact in the human population, but livestock maybe we can do, but in environment, how to assess actually the losses what we incur. The impact of endemic zoonotic diseases is far higher in developing countries. We just have to think about endemic zoonosis like rabies, which is much more available in developing countries and is claiming many lives. And the impact of pandemics is severe in all countries. So as soon as a zoonotic disease starts spreading worldwide, and we call it a pandemic, and COVID-19, but even influenza were examples, then actually the impact is much higher. On the right-hand side, you can see the economic impact of diseases like SARS, H1N1 swine virus, and others as well. But if we put, and I think it's next, if we put COVID-19 on top of that, it's actually, it shows that it's outpacing all the other diseases so far. It's estimated that COVID-19 so far has costed about $16 trillion US. Okay, next. Next. Oh, no, it's okay. This slide focuses on AMR,